Next, we will talk about development or coding. So all the roles that we discussed might be done without writing code. You might find a business analyst or a product owner who doesn't know how to write code, okay? The same goes with UI or UX designer. But the next roles require coding. So first we have the front-end developer. So what is the difference between the front-end developer and the front-end designer or the UI designer? The front-end developer converts the design that is delivered by the UI designer into a code. So for example, we have a design of a screen, login, sign up, and so on. So for example, the login button, this is not a button, this is just a picture that says login. So the front-end developer converts it into a button, and when I click on it, for example, it redirects me to the login page. Mostly he uses tools like CSS, HTML, and JavaScript. So like you see here, for example, if I open google.com, right click, inspect. So like you see, this is the UI design of Google, okay? Any designer can create this design. Here we have this button, Google search, and so on. But if I click here on this, okay, arrow, and for example click on this word, Google search, so here this is the work of the front-end developer. He converted this button, this image of a button, into something that I can interact with. So when I write here my name, for example, and click on search, it will really search for what I am looking for. This is the difference between UI design or front-end design and front-end development. The next role is the back-end developer. So what is the difference between back-end and front-end developer? So for example, you are watching this course. You are a student in Udemy, okay? You have a front-end. All what you see inside Udemy platform is called front-end, okay? Because you are only seeing the front end of the application, what the student sees. But what about the management of Udemy, the managers? How do they see the application? How do they add courses or add instructors? How do they answer your questions? When you contact the support of Udemy, who answers you? So this is called the back end, okay? The back end of the application. So any application includes front end and back end. The back end developer deals with different tools other than the front end developer. And also in the back end, the UI is not that important as the front end. Because for commercial reasons, in many applications or in most applications, we care about the front end because this is what the user sees. And this is why the user will pay for our services. But mostly the person who accesses the back end is part of our team. So here the user experience or the UI is not very important. This is why sometimes you will not find anyone who is called back-end designer. This doesn't happen. You only have back-end developer. Here we have a very interesting role that happens in some companies, which is the full stack developer. So if you find someone who is referring to himself as a full stack developer, this means that he works on both front end and back end development, okay? And sometimes also mobile development. So in this case, your task as a tester is much easier. Why? Because if you find a defect in the application, you will just assign it to him. He will deal with it, okay? He has access to the front end and the back end, and he can solve this defect. The problem happens when you have both developers, front end and back end. So you go to the front end developer and tell him, okay, this functionality is not working. He tells you this is an API problem, you have to go to the back end developer. And the same, when you go to the back-end developer, you tell him, I created an invoice, but it was not created on the front end. He tells you, this is a front-end problem, this is not my mistake. So here, the full-stack developer is working on front-end, back-end, and sometimes database or even mobile development. The last one in the developers is the mobile developer. And the mobile developer might be native or hybrid developer. So we will discuss mobile testing later, and we will explain the difference between native and hybrid apps. But for now, you need to understand something. In some companies, we create something that's called native application. The native application means that we have an application for iOS and another application for Android. And in this case, the iOS developer only develops the iOS version of the application. The Android developer is only developing the Android version of the application. They don't interact and they don't have shared code. So in this case, you need to test this application separately and this application separately. And if you find a defect in the iOS version, this doesn't mean that you will find the same defect in the Android version, unless it is a back-end problem. If this is a back-end problem, both applications deal with the same server, with the same back-end. So if the problem is in the back-end, you will see it present in the Android and the iOS. But if it is in the iOS version, for example, the iOS developer made a mistake, you will not find it in the Android. On the other hand, some companies go for something that's called hybrid applications. So here we have same application and the same code shared for Android and iOS. You can know this by your own in sometimes when you see an application on Android and iOS. By looking at the application with some expertise, you might know either it is a hybrid or native. If you find the same behavior on both of them, this is a hybrid application. On the other hand, if the behavior is different, this is a native application. In later sections, we will discuss mobile testing, and I will tell you how to test a mobile application and what are the scenarios that you should focus on while testing a mobile application.